This is the Daily Exchange from New York Consensus. I'm Adam Munro, and this is Mance Harmon from Hedera Hashgraph. A hash graph, right? It's an ultra scalable, directed acrylic graph style distributed ledger, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
So Hashgraph is an alternative to blockchain, where blockchain is very serial or linear and doesn't scale well in terms of performance and cost and security. Hashgraph achieves the theoretical limit in terms of what you can achieve at the algorithm level for security, something called asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance. That's the best you can do. And at the same time, it has fantastic performance. It achieves the limit of what can be achieved in terms of bandwidth efficiency, and what that translates into is at scale, within a single network, a single shard. On our public network, we're expecting 100,000 cryptocurrency transactions per second at almost zero cost.
So that much scalability, I feel like there's always got to be a downside. So how many?
Yeah, you would think that, but it's really just simple math. You know what blockchain, proof of work blockchain demonstrated for us was, for the first time, it's possible to have this distributed ledger where individuals and companies are running nodes that are maybe unknown to each other, or maybe mutually competitive in some way, and you can do that securely. That really was just the first instance of that category, this new category of technology that achieves the different level of security than what had been achieved prior. Hashgraph is a step beyond that, and there are no technical downsides to the approach that we've taken. It's not as though blockchain is better in one dimension than Hashgraph or whatever. In every dimension that you might measure in terms of performance and security, Hashgraph is better than blockchain. Absolutely.
Wow. And on that's the technical side of things.
Yeah,
on
the algorithm.
Governance side of things.
Yeah.
There's how many council of sorts, I gather?
Well, so what we did is we looked, when preparing to build a public network, we looked across the industry and said to ourselves, why is it that there are no enterprise-grade applications running on a public DLT today? And we came up with a list. A couple of them were just technical. Performance and security were two. But then outside of that, I'd call those the hard requirements. You know, better performance, lower cost, better security. Outside of those, we identified a couple of soft issues. One is governance, as you just alluded to, and what we're doing is sort of recognizing the fact that for every public ledger, there is a group of people that ultimately are making a decision about what that ledger looks like, how it evolves over time, the feature set, etc. And we're building a governing body of 39 global enterprises that are cross-sector, so it's not a bunch of banks. We're actually wanting representation from across 18 sectors of the market. They're geo-distributed, so they're not all from one jurisdiction or one country. And then finally, they're term limited, so they can't be members forever. They can serve up to 2-3 year terms, and then they're out. In other words, by design, we're creating a governing body that is meant to be representative of the global market and to be dynamic over time so that it doesn't calcify. And so we believe that we're creating the most decentralized governance body of any of the public networks.
Yeah. So if you look at Bitcoin, for example, who is the governing body? How is it formalized as such?
Well, the interesting thing, you're right. I mean, the interesting thing with Bitcoin is you have a set of core developers, right? A dozen core developers that are making the decision. Now, it is the case that there are contributors that will contribute to the code base outside of those 12. But the reality is that those 12 decide what goes into the code base and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And then you have the miners. It's sort of bicameral governance. You have the core developers that are making decisions about what they would like to put into the code base, and then you have the miners who have to agree to accept those updates.
Yeah.
And there are not that many of them. I mean, you just take a few miners and they represent a majority of the hashing power in the market. So our approach is entirely different. The governance organization is designed to be truly decentralized and independent from consensus. Consensus, the actual running of the nodes, will ultimately be hundreds of thousands or millions of nodes in the network, all running nodes, voting on the order of transactions, but the governing body is the 39 deciding on the feature set, representative of the market as a whole.
So who are some of the 39?
Yeah.
Who's on the short list?
Sure. So the first 5 were announced back in February in Seoul, Korea. And number 1 was Nomura, which is a major bank and financial services organization based in Tokyo. Number 2, Deutsche Telekom, the largest telco in Europe.
Wow.
Number 3, Swisscom Blockchain, the blockchain arm of Swisscom, another major telco in Europe. Number 4 was DLA Piper. They're one of the largest law firms globally. And number 5 is Magazine Luiza. Magazine Luiza is probably the best brand, the most widely recognized brand for online retail sales in Latin America, Central and South America, based out of Brazil. And so those were the first 5. We had our first council meeting in February. We're having our second council meeting here in New York City this week, and we'll be announcing the next tranche of council members shortly. And that includes membership from India and the United States.
That's exciting. Looks like it ticks the boxes so far, right? It's geographically distributed. It's a wide range of industries. The idea is you're going for sheer diversity, right?
Correct. And the other thing is that this is not just a marketing relationship with these organizations. This is an LLC, and each of these member organizations are members of the LLC. So they actually have real responsibility to the governance of the network in a meaningful way. And so where there is technical expertise, it participates in the technical steering committee. Where there's legal expertise, they participate in the legal and regulatory committee, etc. Right? And they provide the oversight of the organization and the protocol as it evolves over time.
So this kind of, it is a sheer business relationship in one sense. Sounds very different to what most other blockchain type projects will do. Do you anticipate this causing differences in how the Hashgraph develops and how it's managed, how it works, how it solves conflicts, and so on?
Yeah, it's interesting. When thinking about the governance model, I actually read a book. It's a book called One for Many, and it was written by a guy named Dee Hock. Dee Hock was the founder of the Visa network back in the 60s.
Oh.
And he was grappling with the same kinds of problems. He wanted to create a network, an alliance of organizations that maybe are mutually competitive, but wanting to improve the industry as a whole. And we took those principles and applied them here. And the result is an organization with a set of bylaws and governance, a governance set of rules or policies that make it so that no single organization can have more influence than any other organization. They truly have to work together to have stewardship over the network. And the other thing that's important is that they are not benefiting directly financially from this relationship. It's not the case that they own treasury, for example, of the tokens. There are no dividends that are being paid out to these organizations. They're doing this because they have use cases for an enterprise-grade public network, and they need a public network like what we have, and they get the opportunity to participate in its governance and represent their industries on a global basis.
Yeah. So in this case, going back, you did say the founder of Visa struggled with similar issues. Would the Hashgraph be analogous to if Visa was developed with Visa itself just being yet another stakeholder in the broader system.
Could Visa be a stakeholder?
In its own system. So for example, you use the analogy of the Visa founder trying to build out a network without giving any individual member too much influence.
Yeah.
Analogously, if Visa was just yet another member in this own wider network, would that be somewhat analogous to what Hashgraph is trying to achieve?
You know, it's interesting. In Visa's case, D coined this term chaotic systems. And the idea is that you have an organizational body that has authority, but then its constituencies could also be consortia or a collection of members that are self-governing, and each one of them could be made up of a collection, collections of other members that are self-governing. It's sort of fractal-like, or recursive in the way that it's structured, and we're doing something very similar to that here. And so, so could Visa be a council member of Hedera at some point in the future? We'd certainly welcome that. About the only restriction that we've said as it relates to council membership is that we don't allow governments, we don't allow governmental agencies. This is really meant to be a network governed by the businesses that want to take this mainstream, help us take the whole category mainstream. They have use cases, and they're representing their constituencies as members of the organization.
Do you feel that will Hashgraph be limited in the number of government use cases it can provide?
Oh, not at all. I mean, it may not be that the governments actually help as council members. They can't govern, but it's a general purpose public network. It's got cryptocurrency, distributed file storage, and smart contract solidity. And so with those three to start, if you're a developer, you can build arbitrarily complex dApps, distributed applications. And it's similar to any of the other public networks like Ethereum. If you're a dApp developer and you want to build a dApp, you have to have HBAR, that's the name of our currency. And for each API call that you make to our network, you pay HBAR for the use of that service. Right? So in that way it's similar to what Ethereum does with Ether and gas. But you make API calls and you pay for each API call with HBAR. So it's a general purpose public network. It's perfectly usable and will support government use cases if they decide that they want to use a public network. But the council membership doesn't include governments at all, and that's by design.
Okay. Governments can't govern. Ironic.
They can't govern. They're not helping to govern this global public network. It's Hedera. That's correct. Now we do care about regulators, and what I mean by that is we sort of recognize that for the whole industry to go mainstream, meaning that we have mass adoption of public DLT, then the regulators are going to have to be able to regulate. It will never happen until they are comfortable. And so we've built into the platform a set of features that makes it possible for the regulators to do that on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. So for example, regulators in the United States that want to require KYC for certain categories of transactions would be able to do that, and we have the infrastructure in place to technically implement that, and it would have absolutely no bearing on transactions that occur outside of the United States in any other jurisdiction. And so in a way that's similar to how regulators work today on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis, if I'm going to the bank and I'm wanting to deposit money into my bank account, U.S. has its own set of laws that regulate that outside of Switzerland or China or Russia. And we're enabling that, again, on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis.
So truly the global network, the one size fits all, as near as it can in blockchain, is what you're going for.
That's it. That's exactly what it is. Our strengths are the performance in terms of cryptocurrency transactions with native support for micropayments, meaning that Alice can pay Bob a fraction of a penny and do so economically and do so on Graph. It doesn't have to be with the Lightning Network or any side chains or anything. You can do it directly on the Graph, thereby increasing both performance and security for the transaction. And then to support general purpose applications or dApps, we have distributed file storage and smart contracts.
So what's the next steps? More council members, more growth, more adoption?
Right. So we have joined Hyperledger. That's new news. We've just recently joined Hyperledger project as a member. And we view the world not as a choice between permissioned networks and public networks. I think that the future is hybrid, for sure. There different use cases are going to require certain aspects of private and certain aspects of public, and we are contributing code that will make it possible for Hyperledger project developers to easily be able to take advantage of the Hedera public network, enterprise-grade public network. And so that's new. In addition to that, we've announced partnership with Chainlink that is making it possible to include the use of oracles in the network through Chainlink services.
Very handy.
Yep, very cool. And in addition to that, we just kicked off today, as a matter of fact, the second round of community testing that will run for several weeks. There'll be a couple of phases of this community test program, and people that come in and create accounts and help us test the network are getting paid HBAR for the work that they're helping us do. We'll make another announcement of the second tranche of council members, and then later this summer, we will have what we call open access, and that's when the network goes live for open use by anybody that's ready to create an account and use the services of the network.
So you got a month for the exciting date?
Yeah, not a month yet, but it is this summer.
This summer?
Yeah.
Anyone can hop on Hashgraph this summer.
You can actually, if you're a developer, you can go on Hashgraph now and use the test networks. We have test networks and several hundred dApps that are already using those test networks to build applications, and many of them will go live with us when we have open access later this summer.
Exciting times ahead. Thank you very much for joining us, Mance.
Thank you. Thanks for your interest.